On a lonely planet slowly spinning its way to damnation, amid the incompetence and unpreparedness of lesser space programs, one team stands resilient against the herds, putting their lives on the line to aid those who are previously unaware of the quick-save option. Yes, it's the incredible adventures of Jebediah and his crack team of Kerbals. They are the Blunderbirds, saving the Kerbian race one stranded explorer at a time.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Blunderbirds, the second Blunderbirds in just 2 weeks. I really am spoiling you guys. I hope you enjoy, but here you can see Anton Roche has stranded his Kerbals on the surface of Duna, so we need to go and rescue them. Here we can see his rocket didn't quite have enough fuel to reach orbit. Now I know I did mention in the previous episode of Blunderbirds that I was becoming a little bit apprehensive about the fact that this series is sort of becoming just Duna and Mun rescue missions, but I saw this post on my Discord server and I saw that, he did have Kerbals on the surface of Duna that he tried to rescue himself, and ultimately was the rescue mission that failed. And I was like, you tried, you put in a good effort. I know how frustrating it is when these things go wrong, so ultimately I was very moved by the plight of Anton Roche. I thought, let's go ahead and step in and try and rescue them. So here you can see me building the Duna lander itself. Obviously we're going to be rescuing 7 Kerbals from the surface of the red planet, and we're going to be needing 8 seats. We can send our own Kerbal down to plant the Blunderbird's flag, so we require a pretty hefty lander. So I went with this design. So it's a robotic lander with just the 2 hitchhiker crew compartments, I think that's what it's called. And then we're going to do a second launch for the main mothership. We're going to rendezvous the 2 ships in low Kerbal orbit just to try and spice things up a little bit, make it a little bit more interesting. So nothing really to talk about with this lander. The only thing of note, I guess, is the fact we're using an aerospike engine because Duna has an atmosphere, and because this is a single stage lander, it'd be good to use the aerospike because the aerospike maintains its efficiency throughout all levels of atmosphere, be it very, very dense atmosphere near the surface and very, very tenuous atmosphere towards kind of the Kármán line, or the Duna equivalent of the Kármán line. So the aerospike's a good choice for this mission, but I think the main driving force is the fact that it's pretty efficient and has a very small profile, so it makes it very easy to integrate into a lander such that the engine doesn't extend below the actual height of the landing legs. So then we're going to construct just a fairly standard, almost SLS-esque rocket underneath. You may have noticed I added a probe core to the upper stage just because Anton Roche plays in career mode, so I thought let's try and save a little bit of money by recovering the upper stage. The lower stage recovery is a little bit harder without mods, unless you fly a very specific flight plan that I didn't really want to fly because it didn't really align with the flight plan I wanted to fly, basically, so I decided not to bother recovering the lower stage. Now here you can see me building the actual transfer stage, the mothership if you will, and you can see I've got those 4 refineries at the top. Those aren't actually there to stay. That's just because they weigh about the same as the fully fueled Duna lander, and I wanted to ensure that this thing had enough delta V in low Kerbal orbit once it had rendezvoused with the lander, so I just added a mass of equivalent weight of the thing we need to move whilst I was designing it in order to ensure we had the right amount of delta V, and then we can remove it once we've finished building it, basically. And in fact I did, before I get talking about what's on screen, you may have seen I did have quite a big rocket for the transfer stage. I ended up scrapping that and going with a slightly smaller design, but I forgot to press record when I designed that, so you won't get to see that unfortunately. Anyway, here we are flying the Duna lander into low Kerbal orbit. Not much to talk about with the ascent overall. It's a fairly standard gravity turn, just a nice smooth arc up into orbit, and then that's it. That's the gravity turn. I won't be ditching the lower stage as I normally would do before I reach orbit. We're going to actually be reaching a fully circular orbit using the skipper stage there, just because we have a probe core to deorbit it, so we don't need to worry about leaving debris in orbit. Although that won't really matter overall because you become apparent very quickly. And that is because Anton Roche has won the very prestigious award of most cluttered low Kerbal orbit I've ever seen in an episode of the Blunderbird. Because you might have seen just a very quick snapshot of it on the map screen. It was a it's a pretty messy low Kerbal orbit. So what you'll actually see me do is I'll rename my vessels to have, like, you know, you can rename them into a certain category, like rocket, space plane, that sort of thing. I end up renaming this ship that you're seeing launched now in very SLS-esque fashion. I'll end up renaming it as an aircraft, and the lander actually I'll be renaming as a lander, just to make it easier to filter out all the other vessels on the map screen. Anyway, lest we forget about talking about this thing whilst it's flying, like we did with the other rocket, I used SRBs. Now they've gone, but I used SRBs to help get us off the pad, just because SRBs are nice and cheap compared to the other types of booster, as in the one other kind of booster. Because again, we're playing on career mode, saves a bit of money by using cheap rockets, and then we'll be burning the rest of the way up with a very similar rocket to what we used for the Duna lander, a main sail stage for the actual lifting component, and then once we're in the nice thin atmosphere where we don't need as powerful an engine and efficiency becomes more of an issue, we'll be using a skipper stage to reach the rest of almost reach orbit, I should say, because we're not going to be recovering the lower stage this time because I forgot to add a probe core to this. No other reason, genuinely. I just forgot to add a probe core and stuff to this one. So we'll be ditching this one just before we reach Apprehensive and finish our circularization using the nuclear engines themselves. But it won't take very much to circularize. We're not exactly wasting much fuel by not using the lower ascent stage to finish our orbit. So we're reaching pretty high up in the atmosphere now, to the point where atmospheric drag isn't really a factor, so we can go ahead and deploy our fairings and get a good look at the mothership there. So as of late, I guess I've been doing this for quite some time, actually, probably over a year. Gosh, doesn't time fly, eh? Is that a pun? Let's go with that. It was a pun. As of late, let's go with that, whatever. I've been generally overbuilding my rockets, as in the actual interplanetary modules, whilst they could, realistically for this game, just be a command pod. I like to add like maybe a science lab or just lots of hitchhiker storage modules or any other kind of crew pod, just because it means that, you know, realistically we wouldn't just send astronauts in one tiny little Saturn V command pod and that's it. We would add, like, you know, big compartments. They have their own living space, laboratory quarters, that sort of thing. My headcanon fantasy is that those hitchhiker storage modules are actually just bays that contain hibernation chambers, or stasis chambers, whatever the actual correct term would be. So we can kind of justify sending Kerbals to Elu and stuff on massively long missions, like 80-year missions, without them seemingly age. So that's kind of why I use the hitchhiker storage modules. And like we have 4 sleep modules in there. I don't know, kind of a weird tangent. Anyway, I didn't really feel the need to talk about our rendezvous here because there's not really much to discuss. One thing I will mention, you may have noticed I launched the Duna lander in the morning, and that was so I could launch the transfer stage in the same day, so launching it in the evening. Seemed like a kind of a cute thing to do at the time because we're launching on the same day, thereby saving lots of time when it comes to rescuing the Kerbals on Duna. But that ultimately meant, and I completely forgot about this rather crucial detail, is that we wouldn't be launching in a place that would enable us to get an easy rendezvous point. So we ended up having to orbit quite a few times before we could get a close encounter with the lander stage. So ultimately it didn't really make much difference either way. And I guess in the grand scheme of things, it does take a very long time to reach Duna. So, you know, a few hours to wait for the next day doesn't really add up to much. Anyway, we can now see that the full vessel configuration is complete. So we can go ahead and detach our lower skipper stage because we won't be needing that for the rest of the flight. I added those separatrons there just to make sure it's safely cleared the rest of the ship, and then we could just cut to us safely landing it Falcon 9 style, kind of, because we'll be using a parachute, but then I used the engine to kill off the last little bit of velocity. So it's a little bit of both Kerbal and SpaceX landing, but with a little bit of Kerbal flavor added because I landed it on a slope, and well, it didn't all make it. I guess it's actually a lot of SpaceX component there as well. So if anything, it's a faithful recreation of the early Falcon 9 landing. So you're welcome, guys. You get a Falcon 9 recreation as well in this video. So not much more to comment on other than getting our transfer window to Duna. You may notice I went ahead and set up a transfer window before we launched. That was one thing I actually did plan with this mission properly, To get a good, efficient encounter with Duna, you want to be launching in a place such that if you were to draw a line from Kerbin to the sun to Duna, the angle that those two lines would form at the sun would be about 45 degrees. It's quite an easy transfer window just to eyeball. That's what I do. But you could always use something like Kerbal Alarm Clock or an online tool such as Transfer Window Planner if you would like to play this game properly. But there we are. We've done the first of our 2 burns. We only have 2 nuclear engines powering this thing, so we haven't got terrific thrust-to-weight ratio. So what we're going to do, we're going to do 2 escape burns to get to Duna. I did raise our periapsis slightly because you may have noticed we temporarily entered the atmosphere, albeit the upper atmosphere, but still the atmosphere nonetheless. When we did that first burn, so I thought I'd raise our periapsis just to ensure that wouldn't happen for our second escape burn. Splitting a burn over 2 parts like this is a bit more efficient because we're using the O-berth effect, and that is the law that states that the closer you burn, at least for this context, the closer you burn at periapsis, the more efficient your burn. This being specifically kind of pro-grade burns for this. Like normal burns, for example, are not more efficient at close to a planet's surface. But ignoring that, it's fine. So there's our Duna encounter there. All we really need to do is get an encounter that gets us to its sphere of influence, and then we'll do some tweaking as we enter deep space, deep interplanetary space. We'll do some modifications to our orbit to get ourselves on an encounter. Now, we don't want to be going into an equatorial Duna orbit, as we would normally try and aim for if we were just doing a standard Duna mission, because, of course, we're actually trying to aim for a specific spot on Duna, that being where the stranded ships are, roughly. So we're going to be going for this very inclined orbit, and then we'll just wait for the planet to rotate the stranded ships below us. That's what we're going to do. Now, I feel like this is way too late to mention this, over 10 minutes into the video, but I'm going to mention it now anyway. There is the rescue ship that we need to go and get, but there's also 2 kerbals stuck in a rover. Now, you see, Anton Roche said that he had 7 kerbals trapped on Kerbin, but there are only 5 kerbals inside the rescue ship. But there were an additional 2 kerbals in some random rover pretty close to the rescue ship, so I'm guessing he wanted those rescuing, or at least recovering too. I have asked him on Discord, and he hasn't got back to me, so sorry if I've just completely ruined your plans for a long-distance rover mission, but I just decided to recover those as well. So we're going to be rescuing some kerbals in a rover that you will see when the time comes, as well as the ones that you saw in the stranded rescue ship. Anyway, here we are at Duna. I did consider doing an aero capture because this thing does have enough delta V to capture using engines and then, well, capture using engines, but then we wouldn't have very much delta V left. We would probably have to ditch the lander for one thing, which means sacrificing lots of walking space for the long journey back home. And also it means that it's quite difficult because we're at a very inclined orbit around Duna at this point, and it's much harder to get a good Kerbin encounter when coming from such an eccentric position. So I thought, let's just save some fuel and do some aero braking. It's not like Duna's atmosphere is very thick, so it's not going to destroy our components. And then we'll have lots and lots of fuel to get ourselves a good Kerbin encounter, get home as quickly as possible. So yeah, I did lower our apparatus. Can I talk? Maybe not. Our apparatus was a little bit low, so I had to do some quick puffs with the nuclear engines, but it wasn't too expensive. And there we are, 1 final burn at Apprehensive gets us into a nice circular Duna orbit. Now it comes the probably the hardest part of the mission, that is getting an accurate landing, just because we're going to be landing with parachutes, again, to save fuel on the landing stage. And, landing accurately with parachutes can be a little bit difficult, so it often does necessitate trial and error. So make sure you make good use of F5 and F9 when doing this for yourself if you want to. But again, with practice, it doesn't become too difficult. It didn't take me that many attempts. I think this was like my 2nd or 3rd attempt to get this thing on an encounter with the stranded ship. And we've got a pretty close encounter as well. Don't forget that although Duna's gravity is pretty high and it has an atmosphere, the EVA packs do still work here. Admittedly, not as well as somewhere like the Mun, but they do still work, so we can cover fairly large distances without too much problem. So there's our target there. Going to just point ourselves down. We can do a little bit of control using air brakes. And then we're just going to do the final bit of our descent using both the engine and parachutes. Because although the parachutes will save us a huge amount of fuel, we will still need to use the engine for the final part of the touchdown. Because again, Duna's atmosphere is just so thin that landing with just parachutes alone can be fairly difficult. So we deployed the ladder and then subsequently didn't use it. And there is our brave Kerbal there, planting her flag. I decided to collect a surface sample as well, just because we are on career mode. So hey, why not get some science whilst we're here? There's our blunderbuss flag there. We can give it a little name. Not the most creative, but it gets the job done. Oh, in fact, I went back and changed it. Never mind. Blunderbirds are here. Far more creative. So not much more to talk about than just, get our kerbals into the Blunderbird craft. I'm not going to show the process of getting all of them on board, but oh, getting a bit choked up here. It's Friday night, I'm getting a bit thirsty, It's quite warm in the UK at the moment. It's like 3 degrees, which is so I'm pretty thirsty actually. I don't know why I'm telling you this, but we're getting our kerbals on board. In fact, I did show a picture. This is completely irrelevant to everything. I did show a picture of the lander on Twitter, and everyone thought I was recreating the Starship, the SpaceX thing. So sorry for disappointing if you were hoping to see Starship. Maybe I'll do it at some point, but I feel like everyone's recreating the BFR and Starship at this point, so I feel like there's not much more I could bring to the table. Anyway, here is the rover I mentioned earlier. Again, I'm not going to show the entire drive because it would take far too long, even at 4 times speed in post-production. So I'm just going to show like a little sort of montage of it driving along to, I don't know why. I probably could have just hyper-edited the whole thing to the lander and it would have saved me a lot of time, and it's not like you guys would have thought any different. I mean, you probably would have, let's face it. I mean, I would if I was watching, but here we could just, we'll just crossfade. We'll just crossfade to getting to the rescue ship and getting our kerbals on board. There it is. But yeah, on that drive, all things considered, that was actually one of the best handling rovers I've ever driven. I guess it has a nice low center of mass, which means it doesn't flip very easily, which is something that a lot of Kerbal rovers unfortunately tend to do. Rovers are something I would like to make more rovers, but I've never really thought of any good video topics for them other than just building big mobile bases, which is what pretty much all my rover videos have been, outside of things like Expedition Eve. And the one rover mission I did, which I would probably just end up recreating this because I really liked the mission. It was the Dres Canyon rover I made all the way back in 2015. It's one of the first videos I ever made. It's actually still one of my favourite videos, come to think of it, but that might just be the nostalgia talking. I feel like if I watched it now, I'd still enjoy it though. So, feel free to go on YouTube, search Matt Lowne Dres Canyon Rover. It's not monetizable because I used copyrighted music, so C2C makes all the money, and C2C are a good band. Go support them by watching my video, I suppose. Yeah, that's kind of a rover mission I might revisit, but with commentary to add some insight, because as I'm sure you know, these commentaries are very insightful, always on topic, never rambling, very well scripted, always on point. You learn a lot from these commentaries. Hopefully the sarcasm was detected there. Anyway, there's our ascent all done. Didn't even get a chance to talk about that, but again, I hope the footage speaks for itself. Thing is, I could talk about how to rendezvous, how to ascend, all this, but at the end of the day, it's all practice. I learned how to do it by just watching videos and doing it again and again and again and again and again and again. Eventually, you just get it. It's not something you really learn as such. It's just a knack. There are aspects you can learn just from like watching things and kind of gain concepts of, or which I still recommend the Scott Manley Rendezvous tutorial. Everyone always asks me to make my own detailed tutorial video for Rendezvous, and I just don't know how to top Scott Manley's, even though it's quite old now. He just covered it so succinctly, far more succinctly than I have the ability to. But just everything he mentions, like if I was to do a tutorial, it would literally just be a rehash of his script, and I hate the sound of my own voice, so I would always point people to Scott Manley's anyway. So I don't know, just type it in on YouTube, Scott Manley rendezvous tutorial. That's how you do it if you want to know how to rendezvous. But like I say, it is mainly just practice. Anyway, speaking of rendezvous, here we are, getting close to our ship. One aspect you may see, because this is a robotic lander, we had to do it with no fine controls, because we're not in a direct connection to ComNet, because I forgot we're playing on some other guy's career mode, not my own, and so we don't have a good satellite network, and we have ComNet enabled, so we didn't have probe control, so I had to do everything kind of with Z and X when it came to controlling the thrust, and only using auto SAS to get this thing oriented. Ended up working okay, it wasn't too disastrous, and then we can do the actual fine-tuned docking using the mothership, where we actually have full control because we have a pilot Kerbal on board, but because we have a robotic lander that can hold things using auto SAS, we can set it to remain locked onto our target, so pretty uneventful, nice and easy dock. And then that's it. That's the hardest components of the mission done. We have well over 1,000 meters per second of delta V, which is more than enough than we need to get back to Kerbin. So we're just going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to leave the lander attached just because although it's not needed, like I mentioned earlier, from a realism standpoint, it would probably make sense to have a nice big ship to provide lots of space for our kerbals. Again, we can just pretend that they just contain stasis chambers for our kerbals. I mean, in reality, kerbals, look at them. Look how happy they are. They love space. They don't get bored in space. Kerbals love space. When I send kerbals on 150-year missions, I do it out of kindness, not out of apathy to try and plan transfer windows better. I do it out of kindness. That's what I do it for. So, just gonna get an encounter. Like the encounter with Cohen it's pretty difficult to get it when we're on such an inclined orbit, as I said earlier. But it's pretty easy to force one if you don't mind just spending lots and lots of fuel and getting a very, very eccentric Kerbal encounter that will mean we'll be entering the atmosphere at fairly high speeds and subsequently fairly high G-forces will be inflicted on the ship. But again, you know, Kerbals, they're pretty hardy. They love space. They love high G-forces. I'm doing them a favor, guys. Trust me. Trust me. I'm a rocket scientist. So, goodbye, Duna. Hopefully forever for these Kerbals. Actually, no, because again, I said Kerbals love space. But, you know, at least for a little while, we'll say goodbye just so we can get home. So I had to actually wait a whole orbit in order to get a good Kerbin encounter because Duna was just in completely the wrong position to get an encounter with Kerbin when we left. So I had to do one orbit just to loop around and then we could perform our burn to, get our Kerbin encounter. Hopefully not a Duna encounter. Get a Kerbin encounter. Whew, English, Matt. Do you speak it? No, I do not. I do not speak English, guys. It's just, it's very late on a Friday night. I've had a long week at work. It's been very busy. And so I'm ready to fall asleep. As soon as I finish recording this commentary, I'm just going to hit render and then just, I don't know, probably just watch Batman on my TV. I've got the Blu-ray for the 1984 Batman. Not 1984? No, it was 1989, wasn't it? 1984 was that book. That weird book. I want to watch Batman, the Tim Burton Batman. There's only really one good film in that series, the trilogy in 4 parts. So I think it's like an anthology because they're all kind of standalone. I think the box set says anthology on it, even though I'm pretty sure they all kind of are sequels, even though there's 3 people that play Batman throughout the whole thing. The first one's good English again. The second one is very camp. I think it's just Tim Burton going full Tim Burton, and the other 2, we don't talk about the other 2. Welcome back to my commentary, guys, on how to play Kerbal Space Program while providing anecdotes on old Batman films, apparently. So I like to detach my various stages that aren't the lander fairly late, so we get a nice fireworks show upon re-entry. I'm using the inflatable heat shield just because it probably is overkill for what we're using it for. It means that we're kind of protecting the entire mass of the lander. And as you can see, we've got a big descent vehicle. Very bulky. I was worried that just the standard ablative heat shields wouldn't quite provide enough protection for the overall craft. So I used the inflatable heat shield just to ensure we were definitely going to be okay. We have air brakes as well. And again, I forgot that I had air brakes on this thing, so I don't use them for this descent. But let's just say we had them as a backup in case the parachutes failed. I mean, if the parachutes failed, the air brakes would not be powerful enough. So it would have been just prolonging the inevitable really for our Kerbals. But luckily, I guess they could have slowed the ship down enough for the Kerbals to all bail out and use their own parachutes. So I guess that's actually why I had the air brakes, guys. Let's go with that cover. Anyway, there we can deploy the ladder because we want to get our Kerbals onto solid ground. Smell the fresh green grass. The air, taste the air. There they all are, and we can plant one final Blunderbird's flag before transitioning to the outro in just a second. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Did you like having the multi-stage ship, actually? I was thinking maybe doing more ships like that, where you don't just launch one gigantic, ridiculous craft, but instead launching multiple components, just because I find it more fun myself. And it also means we can have slightly more realistically proportioned rockets. Or would you prefer I just skip all of that and cut straight to the chase and minimize the amount of faffing we do before the actual mission gets underway? Which is why I've always done the more ridiculous rockets in the past, just to kind of get things going quickly. Do let me know. It's something I actually genuinely want to know. But other than that, don't worry, tired Matt, it's nearly the end. Here is the end screen, here are some videos. Hope you enjoyed them. Twitter, Discord, Patreon, Instagram, my merch, all in the description. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend.